You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Daly and Kevin Laramie.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One racing. My name is Mark Daly and I'm joined as always by Kevin Laramie. Kevin, it's late, but there still is a little bit, well, not a little bit, actually quite a bit of news to talk about this week in the world of Formula One. And of course, still being the end of January, it is news that's off the track rather than on it, but it's been a week of some pretty big moves in the boardroom at the very top levels of Formula One. So why don't we just get right into it? The big piece of news that sort of broke, I guess it was the end of last week, Friday, Saturday, somewhere at the beginning of the weekend at any rate, was that with the purchase of Formula One by Liberty Media, it was suggested that Bernie Ecclestone would no longer be the top man and he would be maybe assuming, or at least offered, a title of honorary president. And now with the sale completed of Formula One to Liberty Media, that has indeed happened. Chase Carey is now the guy, and Bernie Ecclestone is now without a job.
86-year-old Bernie Ecclestone doesn't need to work for one more minute the rest of his life. We all know that. Let's reflect for a second, Mark, on the last 40 years of Bernie Ecclestone's. I think he pulled off the ultimate hustle in the world of sports, business, and finance in the last 40 years. From a agent of Formula One driver to owner, part owner, and eventually owner of a team, to go get influence and become the right owner of the television side and the commercial side and create that side, and then becoming literally the head of Formula One. What a hustle, career, and business path Bernie Ecclestone had.
Absolutely. And I was having a discussion with somebody yesterday, and he was saying, well, I don't really like Bernie Ecclestone, and I don't think he's a very nice guy, and things like that. Of course, this fellow had never met Bernie in his life. Not that I have, but that's beside the points. Anyways, I said to him, I said, well, does it really matter? I said, love him or hate him, Bernie Ecclestone is the guy that built Formula One to where it is right now. Yes, there are areas that need to be improved on. That's the same with any large business or sport. There's always things that could be improved to make the show a little bit better. But at any rate, without Bernie Ecclestone, Formula One wouldn't be what it is today. And it's amazing what do you think that he accomplished after selling, what was it, secondhand cars in London in the 1950s and just working his way up through the sport over the last 4 decades. Well, even longer than that if you consider what he did before that. But I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And then to sell the whole thing for $8 billion to Liberty Media is just, I can't put my mind around it. But
no, exactly. And now what will be interesting is how Liberty Media and Chase Carey takes care of things. What we can expect already, maybe not this season, but in the next few seasons, is a more commercial side of marketing side of Formula One taken advantage of. If you're looking at marketing wise, Formula One, only one employee was full time. The rest was relying on individual track to do their own marketing and own ad sales on their own markets. But Formula One itself was a company, was an association, an organization that was lacking in what is becoming now mainstays of business, which is marketing, social media, social perception that you do give out that drives the revenue stream nowadays. And that was lacking for Formula One. It still is. And that will be one of the very early focal point of the new administration.
Well, that's right. And not only was Bernie forced out, or well, I guess you could say he was forced out, but anyways.
He was fired. No, literally, Mark, he was fired because he was supposed to be for 3 years the mentor of Chase Carey. Chase Carey was the CEO, but Bernie Ecclestone was supposed to be for 3 years still his right-hand man and guide him through. Chase Carey have been with Bernie Ecclestone for the last 6 months. So basically, he was learning the most amount of information from Bernie Ecclestone as he can in a short amount of time, knowing that eventually they're just going to fire him.
That's right. And they did give him that title of honorary president, but that's more of a figurehead thing. And I don't even think Bernie understood what that was. But they've even said subsequently that they would like to keep him as an advisor because, I mean, obviously being around the sport and built it up and being the architect of Formula One, obviously he still would have some very, very valuable insight and input. But Liberty have been busy the last couple of days, and the first things that they did once they were in control after getting rid of Bernie was appointing Ross Brawn, yes, the Ross Brawn, and also Sean Bratches, who was a former executive with ESPN, to a couple of the top jobs. These are newly created roles. Bratches will take care of more of the commercial side, and Ross obviously will take care and oversee more of the sporting side of Formula One. And they've been busy almost right off of the bat. On Tuesday, Bratches told CNN that there are 4 areas that he would like to start working on immediately. And that's the brand perception, which you just touched on, Formula One's digital products, how they interact with their partners, so the team, sponsors, promoters, rights holders, etc. And then finally, creating a better race experience for fans for a race weekend. And that doesn't matter whether that's live in person at the track or watching at home on TV, or perhaps maybe if it's being streamed onto your smart device, whatever the case may be. Yeah. So they're already talking about what they'd like to do. Ross Brawn has said that he's already got ideas that he would like to say, because he says Formula One is too gimmicky, and he said because Ross has been out of the sport since the end of 2013. He was the former team principal, and he basically got forced out at Mercedes. He was a little bit unsure of what his role was, and I guess he got a little bit pushed out by Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda. So I mean, he basically retired. Yeah.
Let's not forget there was a lot of politics in that team, stemming from literally Mercedes taking over Brawn GP and buying it and rebranding it Mercedes. So over the years there was a lot of politics, if you want to put it nicely, in behind closed doors in Mercedes, and who controls, who's going to set a new direction on all those type of questions.
And of course, and politics is part of Formula One. But what I was just going to sort of lead into what Ross was saying is that as a fan being on the sidelines for the past 3 or 4 years, is that it's become very gimmicky. And he said that there was times that even he didn't fully understand what was going on. And if you have a guy like Ross Brawn saying that he doesn't understand all the things that are going on, all the technology, that how will ordinary fans understand it? And he said, for one thing, it's like a lot of the technology is too gimmicky, especially like DRS and things like that. Sure, it stimulates or promotes overtaking.
I know what you mark, like the battery aspect, the push to pass, all the little gimmicky things that you can add, or just the aspect of saving your fuel, saving this, saving that. Yeah, it becomes like a gimmick. Yeah, it becomes not the actual talent of driving the car, but other intangible talents that become highlighted because of the gimmicks.
Yeah, and it's almost artificially creating the show and overtaking and things like that, because I think last year Formula One did set a record for overtaking. I think it was the most amount of overtakes since sometime in the 1970s. I forget exactly which year it was, but
what they mentioned, it was all the Mercedes taking over, lapping everybody. That was the overtaking taking place.
Yeah, and then of course some of the criticism as well was because a lot of the overtaking was because of DRS, and so a lot of purists were saying, well, that's not really overtaking because you've got this guy that's drafting another car and he gets to open his rear wing to get a little extra boost of speed and then be able to help overtake. So I can see it from both sides, but Liberty definitely have a lot of ideas that they want to implement, but a lot of the structures for the governance of Formula One are still firmly fixed in place. So a lot of radical things like say, for example, the strategy group, which has all the big players in there, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, etc. There's 5 of the big teams plus 1 rotating seat that one of the smaller teams gets every year. So that's part of the current governance of Formula One. So that's in place until 2020, but yeah, they can't really do anything with that until that point, but they may be able to do things in other areas, and they do have plenty of ideas.
One of those areas is that payment to Ferrari every year.
Yes.
$100 million that will literally, if you would take the words of Chase Carey, it will put an end to it right now because it's not fair for the other team. Then it kind of makes sense. In today's landscape, where if it wasn't for that, Ferrari would probably not be the team that it is today now because the landscape has changed a lot. But you mentioned Sean Bratches, and that for me is a key hire here. You got a former ESPN executive. He's been drafted into F1's commercial chief to work alongside Chase Carey, the CEO. But he brings a different aspect. He's going to bring the digital, social media content, branding, pushing in a different way, use digital platforms that the Formula One is way behind, maybe watching live the race on your tablet and whatever the case may be, virtual reality. It can go fast. Sean Bratch is going to bring a different perspective to Formula One, working ESPN, working in the United States and the North America market, will bring a different viewpoint perspective that can maybe help finally Formula One get a foothold in the North America, well, in the American market. It has a foothold in Canada, but maybe get a bigger reach in the North American media with a bigger reach in the States. So a lot of potential great things could happen with Sean Bratch's name as commercial chief of Formula One.
Definitely. And it's exciting to think that they are looking at more digital products that they can provide to fans of Formula One. Because
sorry to interrupt.
No,
Mark.
go ahead.
An example, F1 TV, an F1 channel. Nowadays, it would be feasible to have with all the archive that Formula One has, that you can build something around it and have obscure sessions that you don't show between practices now shown on that channel. You can maybe, and that could be like a digital channel that you can get a la Netflix or something with the archives of Formula One. A lot of potential digitally with the archive of Formula One as well.
Well, exactly. And that's a great idea. I was just going to mention that I really like the Formula One app that has the live timing on it, for example, and has a lot more of the live audio between the pits and the drivers, even more so than what you get on a broadcast during a qualifying or a race session. But every time I sit there and I have it running on my smartphone, I kind of think, well, is that it? You know, what else could they use? And what you're saying, like an F1 channel, that would be great. I mean, Lord knows they have 50 plus years of content. And if they can make something like a ESPN Classic Canada work, where they replay old football games, basketball games, hockey games, whatever the case may be, there's so much material for Formula One.
Oh, so much material, Mark. You played in sequence the entire season, every day a new race. For example, the 97 season where Dragunev won, or the 96 season with Damon Hill. You know, it will create a habit. I will watch the races every single day if you put them at a time where I can. And it's that storyline that you can follow. That's what's great with archives. You can tell that year's story in about 3 weeks.
That's right. Instead of dragging it out over the course of 7 or 8 months, or in current time, I guess about 8 months would be about the usual length of a Formula One season. You could probably crunch it out in the same amount of time that you would sit down and watch a season of House of Cards. Well, House of Cards is probably a little bit shorter. It's maybe 10 or 12 episodes per season, but still, I mean, like you say, you could watch an entire season over the course of a couple of weeks rather than the entire year. But it's really kind of interesting to see all the different things that they're doing. And it was kind of fascinating to see some of the things that were just being said once the changes were being made. And current world champion Nico Rosberg, he was on social media the other day. He was thanking Ecclestone for everything he has done for Formula One, being the big man, because Bernie didn't really have very many glowing things to say about him towards the end of last season, and definitely after his sudden retirement. But
there's a but in there too. because he's like, but change was way overdue.
Exactly.
So,
That's
Carey at the best, making our sport awesome again.
Yeah, I thought that the poke that Nico was getting in that tweet that he made was rather subtle, but it was pretty obvious. But it's true, and that is a sentiment that has been echoed around the world of Formula One over the last couple of days. That what Bernie did for Formula One was nothing short of phenomenal. But I mean, he's obviously getting up there. He's 86, and it was just time for a change. And the thing that another thing that Nico Rosberg said about Liberty was that he believes that they understand the show business side of Formula One, and he said that's something that the sport really needs at this point in time. And I totally agree. But just kind of backtracking to something you were saying a couple of minutes ago, one of the other things that Liberty's looking at is that in addition to some of these different areas that they want to concentrate on, they're looking at and trying to increase the awareness and the popularity of the sport in America. I mean, America has so much of a car culture, and obviously there's big potential there. If I even look at the stats for the downloads for this show, our biggest group of listeners is in the United States, even more so in Canada. But that's the internet, right? It doesn't really matter where you're broadcasting from. But so, I mean, that just in a very small way just kind of showcases what the interest is. And Liberty is looking at the possibility of hosting or staging another Grand Prix in the United States in a destination city like New York, LA, Miami, or Las Vegas. So that will be kind of cool to see how that plays out. And I mean, the country's big enough, and potentially there are enough race fans in the United States to support a second Grand Prix, but we'll see what happens.
It's going to happen over time, and a lot of things are going to have to change or evolve or go back to the way it used to be. If you're looking at the motorsport or the league of racing that is the most popular in the United States right now, that would be the NASCAR series, it is a relatable series in a way that it's cars that look kind of like yours. It's the same companies that you drive day-to-day basis. Normal people do. Blue-collar type of companies and brands represented. You look under the hood, you understand how it works. If you're a mechanic and like cars and work on cars, you understand how those cars work. And it's nothing look like spaceships. No, it's just a car, and it's relatable. For F1 to gather that type of popularity and interest, I think they have to follow those guidelines, not change everything and make it NASCAR, no, but make it a little more relatable for everybody and not alienate them by playing the royalty aspect, if you know what I mean, the glitz and glamour, but maybe more concentrating on the mechanical side of the sport.
Yeah, and another area that they need to look at and address is engaging a younger audience. I mean, you and I are by no means old, but do you really see very many teenagers, many people in their early 20s really talking about Formula One? And you look, there's a current crop of drivers that are very young. Max Verstappen is a teenager. Lance Stroll is a teenager. And you look at Pascal Wehrlein, he's quite young. Danny Kvyat, Carlos Sainz. I mean, there's so many young drivers in the sport right now. And I think that's one area. Well, perhaps with these new digital products and some of the things that Liberty has and the knowledge and the experience with, maybe they will be able to broaden the appeal of the sport to different age groups and not just kind of put it out there and just let whoever wants to watch, as has been the current approach for, I guess, basically as long as Formula One's been around over the last 50 years.
To speak of that, there was a video game that was very not popular, very unsuccessful. It was like F1 All-Stars, which is kind of like a Mario Kart, but Formula One. And I never understood why back then Formula One didn't get into the Mario Kart bandwagon or a similar type of game, or maybe a mobile type of game that is addressed to kids, but make them discover the beauty of Formula One and that they grow up to become a fan, or things like this. And they never really embraced the new ways to gather fan with the product they have, including the video game culture, including the TV aspect, a cartoon. I remember as a kid, probably the worst cartoon I ever saw, but it was a cartoon about NASCAR driving in the future with tracks that loops and all that, but it was branded NASCAR, and I started watching NASCAR after seeing that cartoon when I was like 10. So F1, with the type of product and the image and the history it has, there's a lot of avenues it can go to get a new generation excited. Like we know some sports do it successfully.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you look at some of the different teams and the different marques that participate in Formula One. Like Ferrari has instant name recognition, and it's such a sexy brand, and obviously a luxury and a very expensive brand of motor car, but that's one that's instantly recognizable. And of course, Ferrari will try and leverage everything that they have behind their name to make sure that they keep every single penny of that $90 million that they get for taking part of the sport. Anyways, there's so many things like that. And it's just, I was thinking as you were talking there that just about like appealing to a younger audience. And I'm going to sort of paraphrase here, but Ecclestone said in an interview, I think it was on BBC, it was within the last year or two, but basically the gist of it was that he wasn't so much interested in targeting a younger audience, say your millennials or maybe even younger, future fans that will be following the sport 20 or 30 years down the road when they've grown up and they have kids and they're in middle age and basically be passing on to their children. He said, well, I'm not really so interested in that age group. I'm more interested in going after the guy that's maybe 70 years old that already has a ton of money and that's willing to spend it. I'm like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, that 70-year-old guy has a ton of money and maybe he wants to spend it, but he's also 70. He's not going to be around for a long time. I mean, you get kids that are like maybe in their teens or early 20s right now. I mean, that's the future. That's the future of your fans right there.
Long-term gain versus the short-term reward, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The other, or just because maybe he knew they wasn't going to be there for too long anyways. Maybe that's why he didn't care about the other fan base, because he was not going to be the one who's going to try to reach out to them anyways.
That's it exactly. So plenty of things going on behind the scenes in Formula One. In addition to the ousting of Bernie Ecclestone and the appointment of Bratches and Ross Brawn this week, there is also a couple of other little things. The Manor Racing saga, I guess it is a saga if you want to talk about it, but obviously we talked about it on the show last week that the parent company of Manor Racing is in administration. There were talks going on about securing funding for the team so they could continue because they've been preparing for 2017. And I think they needed something like £500,000 to partake in the preseason testing and get to Australia to at least partake in the very first Grand Prix in Melbourne on March 26th. So the deadline was last week to try and get something done. So I don't believe that anything has been done, but the talks were progressing, and there are some still discussions going on with the new investors. So they said that they hope that the money can be sourced before a deadline at the end of this week, next week. So that'll be about the 3rd of February or thereabouts. So
it's cutting it close. It's cutting it very close at the beginning of the season when you're talking about just getting cars, pieces, seats, uniforms, whatever the case may be, ready. Talking about going to be a race against the clock if a positive decision is reached, because the end of March is coming very soon.
Well, that's right. I mean, today is January 25th, so lots of the car launches are only a couple of weeks away now. I know that some of them, they all usually go at some point in February, so we're almost on the cusp of those launches and preseason testing. So every day, almost every hour that a deal is delayed or postponed or whatever the case may be really is crucial for Manor. And it would be a shame for the team if they couldn't make the grid this year, because obviously it's not the Formula One team that's having the problems. It's the parent company. And to think that they've actually been working on and designing the new car, and if it didn't actually get to race in 2017, that would be a bit of a shame. And of course, we went over the drivers for the driver lineups for the different teams last week. And of course, Manor is the only team out there that doesn't have any single driver listed for 2017. So
the fact that is still the case, I think doesn't bode well for Manor. I think the fact that they let the drivers go and They decided to just try to find ways to secure to the beginning of the season, and there might be name, but it's going to be a scramble to the start just to get the drivers. So that in itself, I can see as a sign that it doesn't bode well for Manoa.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. It just sounds a little bit ominous. It's like, oh, you can say all the right things and say you're working on the car for 2017, but if the guys that are going to actually get behind the steering wheel aren't there, if you don't have anybody contracted, that's a big thing. And I'm sure that they can find somebody to jump in, but yeah, it's crucial at this point in time. But talking about other things that that maybe we were talking about last week is that Jonathan Palmer and Motorsport Vision have said that they are no longer interested in buying Silverstone, which is obviously the home of the British Grand Prix. They had expressed their interest and tried to buy the track last year, and they've decided to instead concentrate that on the existing tracks that they have in their portfolio, the ones that they own. And that's quite something, because I believe last year in the spring there were 4 different groups that were all interested in buying Silverstone, and Palmer was quite keen at that time, but they've decided to move on. And there has been some talk that Silverstone, or the British Racing Drivers Club, will exercise that option to break their clause with Formula One after 2019. They do have the rights to host it until 2026, but they've said that it's just getting too expensive because they've got this sliding scale of fees that it costs to host the race every year, and every year it gets more and more. And they've just said that it's costing too much. They've been talking to the UK government about maybe finding a solution with some taxpayers' money, which is always a bit of a touchy subject, but that sort of blends into what we were talking about at the top of the show about Liberty and their ideas for the sport. And they've been saying that the legacy tracks, if you want to call it that, the real traditional tracks in Formula One, so your Silverstones, your Monzas, your Spa-Francorchamps, tracks like that are part of Formula One's history, and they understand the importance behind it. And they've said that they want to stay at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix. And it's also interesting too, because we were just talking about a possible second U.S. Grand Prix, but they did say that Formula One's traditional home and its base still is in Western Europe, so they're still very keen to keep the British Grand Prix there, which is interesting, because they were saying earlier in the year before the sale was complete that they would focus more about developing the sport in Europe and maybe not so much in North America at this point in time. So that's why these different statements regarding Silverstone and possibly a second U.S. Grand Prix have been quite interesting over the last couple of days.
Yeah, Mark, just before we finish, Mark, one thing I want to go back and touch on is Ross Brawn. You mentioned that he's not going to be a sporting director, basically, for Formula One. His arrival is late in the process of the new car and all the new rules and regulation for 2017. But his influence is going to start to be seen more next year and the years after, how he wants this sport to evolve, to change. It's going to change a lot this year, but the fact that he's going to be here to maybe change some things during this season after some result that we see on tracks will be interesting to me. And Ross Brawn was interesting when he came back in 2009 with Brawn GP and surprised everybody and won that championship that season with Button. It's a season to remember, but it's one of the last time a smaller quote-unquote team came in, used their brain, used design engineering to win a championship. And that's kind of the reward you want to see. And Ross Brawn kind of has the blueprint for that somewhere deep in his mind. So if he can use that to be one of his influence as sporting director, I think it could be beneficial for Formula One.
Definitely. And we shouldn't forget that not only did Ross win the Constructors and Drivers Championship in 2009 with his own team, which was born out of the ashes of the previous Honda Works team, which expired at the end of 2008, which was a bit of a failed project.
Which was BAR, which was British American Racing.
That's right, yeah.
But basically, that's what it was. And there was no winning culture there whatsoever.
No, they prior to Ross taking over the team and keeping it going and rebranding it as Ross GP, they'd been quite a rudderless team. They were just there making up the numbers. They were a mid-grid team at the very best. And yeah, you're 100% correct. It was a team that had no winning culture, and then Brawn steps in, and here's a guy that won 5 consecutive drivers' championships with Michael Schumacher at Ferrari from 2000 to 2004, and won 6 consecutive constructors' championships starting in 1999. With Ferrari, he won a constructors' title with Benetton in 1995, and of course Schumacher won 2 world titles there. So I mean, the guy knows what's going on, and he said he's already got some ideas of what he'd like to see implemented into Formula One to make the racing better. He didn't really disclose what that was going to be because he didn't want to say anything in the media before he's really had a chance to talk to the different teams and outline what his ideas are and get some feedback from them. But I don't know. I think just maybe to start wrapping this up now, I think that although it's been a bit of a tumultuous week, and I don't think that we ever really expected to see Bernie Ecclestone kicked out in the way that he was earlier this week, but it is refreshing to see new people in the sport that maybe are a little bit, well, I guess you could say that they are detached from Formula One, but they see what the product is and they see what they want to do with it, and they have a vision and a plan right off of the bat, and it's going to be an exciting time for the sport, and it'll be really interesting to see where it is. Well, this year will probably be, well, I mean, obviously this year's going to be quite something, what with the new cars, but it'll be really fascinating to see how the sport evolves over the next, say, 3, 4, 5 years, at least in the short to mid-term.
When you're spending your time fighting just to stay at the top, when you're fighting for position, you're jousting for position, you're just trying to make sure nobody takes your job, you don't necessarily act in a way for the best of your sport that you are controlling. The last few years have been indicative of that for Formula One. The lack of growth over the last few years, the certain amount of disappointment across the board in Formula One, the hardball negotiating between organizers and Formula One itself. A lot of people had great ideas over the year for Formula One, but never could implement them because there was no way to take the man's job. And he was just there, and he always found he wasn't like elected or had ideas for the future and he gets nominated. No, it was him. He was organized, he was the owner, and it was him, and there was no way to get a point across if he was against it. So for the future of the sport in itself, it's long overdue.
Yeah, and also, like you're saying, the difficulties negotiating with the circuits for different tracks, that's quite something. To me, it seems inconceivable that there hasn't been a French Grand Prix in almost 10 years. And again, there won't be any German Grand Prix in 2017. Things like that really just make me scratch my head. And I think that a lot of the new circuits that they've been to over the last dozen or 15 years or so have been, it's been a mixed result. Some of them have worked out pretty good. Some of them have already come and gone and aren't even featured on the calendar anymore. So I think they really need to really decide on which circuits that they really want to focus on. Obviously, they have an identity, and a large part of that is on some of the iconic tracks. I'm not saying that I don't like any of the new tracks, but definitely it would be nice to see them consolidate and really focus on keeping some of the more famous ones and the iconic ones, rather than jetting off and building these new tracks that maybe stick on the calendar for maybe a year or two and then just become soon forgotten.
I have a theory, and I've talked about this before on this show. You know, the track nowadays are built to accommodate the type of cars that are driven, and I think that's the exact opposite of what it should be. The car should adapt to the different track they're racing on, and that's how it should be. You should have here's my idea of different legendary track of this world all find a way to be included in the Formula One championship. Laguna Seca. You want to have another race track in the United States? Laguna Seca. Is it going to be easy? No. It's a hard track, and there's a corkscrew, and there's a different elevation, and it could be dangerous. But that's what racing is about? No. So maybe that aspect has to come back in Formula One.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a very good point that you raised, because just talking about Silverstone a couple of minutes ago, and if that disappears from the calendar, there was reluctance from some of the different tracks in the UK about hosting the race. And the managing director of Donington Park, where they had a Grand Prix, it was in the 90s. I think they went there for a couple of years, and his name escapes me at the moment. But he said that they have no interest in hosting a Grand Prix because they would have to adapt and modify the track so much just to accommodate the Formula One cars that it would be detrimental to the other series and the other cars that race there, and they're basically the staple of their business year round rather than just one weekend out of the entire year. So yeah, I agree that Formula One and the drivers and the cars should maybe adapt more to the circuits and the circumstances at hand, rather than maybe, like you say, building tracks that adapt to the cars. And that isn't even the case, because with the new cars coming out, they've been submitting data to all the different tracks that are going to be included in 2017 and say, well, here, this is what we expect the cars to do. Now you got to adapt and modify your circuits accordingly so our cars can come and race there at whatever they're going to be here this year.
They say it's a world championship. They say it's the best drivers in the world. But there's one type of race that's not even included. The open wheel racing. There is the oval aspect that you see in Indy racing, and you have great history with Indy 500 in the States, but even in Formula One itself with Monza back then was an oval.
Yep.
So why it would be spectacular if there's one race in the season that it's an oval. It counts for the same type of championship points as the other. Your driving is going to have to be different. Maybe you put a restrictor plate on the cars like they do in NASCAR when they become to a super speedway, so it'll be more safe. Maybe you have to do that, yes, but how spectacular would that be? How amazing and different would that race feel compared to all the other ones? And that would be a different aspect of racing that the drivers will need to be familiar with. And I think that's, I don't know if you understand the type of aspect I'm trying to bring here, but that's kind of the vibe that Formula One needs to regain, where the best drivers, not just the best pilot of Formula One that have been trained to turn left when they're told to turn left and turn right. No, best drivers, period. That's where you want them to be. And for that, you need to test them all around the board. And that's the kind of sandbox I would love my drivers to have.
Yeah, well, don't forget that back in the wouldn't have been in the 70s, but at least up until the late or mid to late 1960s, Formula One drivers would go and race at Indianapolis. Graham Hill, Jim Clark, guys like that, they would go over and race at Indy, which is kind of cool. I mean, obviously, Indy, the oval, has never really been a thing for Formula One, but Formula One drivers have raced there in the past. And yeah, I mean, if you claim to have the best cars and the best drivers and the best everything, prove it. So there's more than one kind of track that really defines Formula One. And like you say, ovals are it is a thing for open wheel racing, and it would be pretty cool to see what a Formula One car, how it would perform on an oval. I mean, we know to a certain degree when they used to race at Indy in that sort of that hybrid track that incorporated part of the oval and then ran through the infield there.
1/3 of the oval, the ill-fated attempt in the Indianapolis. Just want to say that we raced at Brickyard. Yeah, I remember that. That was interesting.
All 6 cars or whatever it was that year that they had the tire protest. Yeah,
it was 6 cars. That was just shameful. But no, that's the kind of vibe. If I was Ross Brawn and Sean Bratches, that's the type of vibe that I would like my series to have. If, like, not just the championship, but the perception by the entire world that the best damn driver will be decided this weekend. I don't know. Maybe it's my 8-year-old mindset. When I say 8-year-old, maybe it's my 8-year-old boy inside of me that thinks that F1 drivers should be the best driver in the world. So, and maybe that's the way to find it out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a pretty good place to leave it for this week. And we'll see what happens between the course of this show and the show next week. What other news come out? Definitely, I think not only myself and yourself, but I think most Formula One fans would love to be a fly on the wall at the in the boardroom at Liberty Media right now and hear some of these different ideas that they're brainstorming and some of the things that they'd like to come up with. And I'm sure bits and pieces of it will continue to get released, and we'll hear more of it as time goes on. But before we let you go, Kevin, could you let everybody know what's going on the network this week?
We have a few brand new shows on the network debuting with new collaborators from the United States. I Need a Mulligan, which is hosted by TK Goldsmith from Nebraska, talks about golf, yes, football, college sports. A great listen. And another show starting this week, My Fantasy Sports Talk, a sports talk show that talks about a little bit of fantasy, a lot of viewers' interaction. So that will start and debut later this week on sportspodcastingnetwork.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramie.
Very cool. Thanks, Kevin. And of course, you can follow this show on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. And we also have a Facebook page that is facebook.com/Scuderia F1 Pod. And that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.